Hello and welcome to Live Full, Retire Early, the podcast where we build calm wealth, intentional freedom and lives that don't need escaping from. We have real conversations with real people, just like you. So if this sounds like your thing, keep on listening. I'm Emma Woodhouse, your host. So today, I want to talk about my first love. And I know what you're probably thinking. Has Emma gone off topic and started to talk about relationships now? Oh, just you wait. My first love was the kind of love that gives you butterflies in your stomach, the kind that makes your heart race, the kind that consumes your thoughts and convinces you your future is about to change forever. And for me, that was property investing. I know that sounds significantly less romantic when I say it out loud. But honestly, there was something about it that completely changed how I saw the world. It was the freedom, the options, the ownership, the possibility that life didn't have to follow the exact script I'd been handed. And I became obsessed with the idea that maybe there was another way to live, and another way to earn, and another way to build a future that didn't revolve about waiting for the next paycheck and surviving until retirement. And yes, before anybody points out, I know you already knew this episode was about property investing because you clicked on the title. So the dramatic reveal probably wasn't quite hard-hitting as I imagined in my head. But stay with me. Now, before we continue, I should probably warn you. This episode contains questionable early investment decisions, emotionally expensive lessons, minor financial trauma, and at least one moment where I genuinely questioned all my life choices. So if you've ever wondered what building wealth through property actually looks like beyond the Instagram highlights and overnight success nonsense, this one's for you. Because today, I want to share the real story, the excitement, the mistakes, the scams, the stress, the lessons, and the mindset shifts that completely change how I think about money, freedom, and life overall. But property investing wasn't really the thing I fell in love with. What I actually fell in love with was what it represented. The freedom, the choice, and the breathing room. Because when I first discovered property investing, it wasn't really about granite worktops, rental yields, or any of the flashy stuff people try and sell online. It was purely the realization that assets could buy you back time. That money could work without you constantly trading hours for it. And maybe, just maybe, work could become a choice one day instead of a necessity. And honestly, that idea hits me like a truck. Because before all of this, before the property, before the podcast, before the coaching, before any of it, I was just a young woman who felt trapped before life had even properly started. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I remember leaving college and feeling this deep sense of dread, of panic, because I knew what the next step was. Not because I didn't want to work. I've never been afraid of hard work, but because I couldn't shake this horrible feeling that life was supposed to look like this. Wake up, commute, work, recover from work, repeat. For the next 40 to 45 years. God. And honestly, the thought of this made me feel physically sick. And sometimes, even now, I still think about it. Because while scripting this podcast episode, I did the maths recently. And I realise I'm already 20 years into what would be traditionally a 45-year working life. And that freaked me out a little bit. Because the truth is, time moves fast. Really fast. Because 1 minute you're 18, living your best life, thinking adulthood feels miles away. And the next minute you're calculating pension ages, figuring out when you will pay off your mortgage and wondering how the hell everyone accepted this as normal. And I remember back then feeling like everyone else around me was just okay with it. Like they'd accepted this script. The script being, get an education, go to work, retire, then hopefully enjoy a few years if your health holds up. And something inside me rebelled against it. And it really did rebel. I couldn't explain it at the time. I just knew I needed another way. And then one day, I came across a book that completely changed the trajectory of my life, which was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Now listen, whether people agree with everything in that book or not is irrelevant, because that was the moment in my life that cracked my brain wide open. It introduced me to concepts nobody had ever taught me before. Assets, cash flow, ownership, passive income, and financial freedom. Why wasn't I being taught this at school? And for the first time in my life, I realised there were people building income streams that existed independently from their time. And then, that blew my mind. And I remember reading it and thinking, hang on, you mean there are people earning money without physically being at work every second of the day? What? And I genuinely felt like I was discovering some giant secret no one had told me about. And from that moment on, I became obsessed. Not casually interested, obsessed. I started reading every book I could get my hands on, watching videos, researching on forums, listening to anyone who sounded like they knew more than me. And eventually, I decided property investing was the vehicle I wanted to use. Now, bear in mind, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. None. I think people forget that part when they look back on their journey. Everyone wants to sound like they were some strategic, confident investor from day one. I wasn't. I was just curious and determined. I spent years viewing properties while secretly having no clue what I was even looking for. I'd walk around pretending I understood structural issues and investing potential while internally panicking. And eventually, after 2 years of learning and trying to build enough confidence to actually do something, I bought my first investment property, and that was in January 2012. It was a grand 3-bedroom apartment in a Victorian manor house. And let me tell you, I was buzzing. Honestly, getting those keys finally felt like freedom had officially begun. And I remember standing there thinking, this is it. This is the start of my new life. And then reality punched me directly in the face, because within a week, the boiler died. Within 2 weeks, I discovered the dishwasher didn't work, then the maintenance problems, and then the tenant issues. And one particular tenant absolutely tested my patience, my sanity. Like, he refused to let contractors in the property unless they arrived at the exact time agreed. Not a few minutes earlier, not a few minutes later. So, if contractors arrived 10 minutes late, he simply wouldn't answer the door. And if you've ever had to deal with contractors before, you know asking them to arrive at the exact minute is basically asking for a miracle. And it was just one thing after another. And there are moments where I genuinely thought I had made a huge mistake. Like the scene from The Hobbit when the dragon escapes the Lonely Mountain and Bilbo is like, "What have I done?" That moment comes to mind. Because nobody talks about the emotional side of investing. Everyone talks about the numbers, but very few people talk about the stress, the uncertainty, and the self-doubt. The sleepless nights when something breaks and you suddenly realise you're financially responsible for fixing it. And that's the side people don't put on Instagram. And then came the experience that nearly made me walk away from property investing completely. A few years later, I joined a property investing network because I wanted to improve my knowledge and level up properly. And through the network, I was introduced to a deal sourcing company offering below market value properties, which sounded amazing. And at the time I thought, this is it. I'm getting even closer to the people who really know what they're doing. Every few days, they'd email new deals through. I did my due diligence, I researched the areas, and I analysed the numbers. And eventually, I paid reservation fees on 4 properties. Then weeks passed. Nothing. A few more weeks passed. Still nothing. And slowly, I started noticing the properties disappearing online. Long story short, the deal sourcing company had taken investors' money, failed to deliver the deals, and when people started asking questions, they vanished, completely ghosting everyone. And eventually, I discovered that this wasn't an isolated thing. This was their business model. They'd take deposits, delay everything, liquidate the company when pressure builds, then reappear under another name. And honestly, I was furious. And I remember going on Facebook and seeing one of the owners showing off a brand new Range Rover and a hot tub. And I thought, you've literally bought that with other people's trust and money, which makes me feel sick to this day. But weirdly, that experience also changed me, because in that moment I realised I had 2 choices. Option 1 was to walk away, decide property investing was too risky, I'd tell myself I'd been stupid and retreat back into safety. Or option 2, learn the game properly, understand it enough that nobody could manipulate me ever again. And thankfully, I chose option 2, because what I eventually realised is this. Property itself isn't the problem. Blind trust was the problem. Lack of education was the problem. And emotional decision making was the problem. And honestly, this is something I see across every area of wealth building now. Because one of my biggest coaching clients is a professional trader. And people hear that and assume, surely he doesn't need coaching. But he didn't hire me because he couldn't trade. He hired me because even highly intelligent, financially successful people still struggle with pressure, decision making, stress, self-sabotage, balance, emotional regulation, and building a life that actually feels good alongside the money. Because making money and managing yourself are 2 very different skill sets. And honestly, I think that surprises people. Because people assume wealth automatically creates peace. But what money does is just amplifies who you already are. Which is why mindset matters, why systems matter, and why self-awareness matters. Because you can know exactly how to make money and still burn yourself out, sabotage opportunities, and make emotional decisions or build a life that looks successful from the outside but feels awful on the inside. And property investing taught me that very early, because your psychology follows you everywhere, into investing, into business, into relationships, into risk, and into success. And we've all heard that saying, wherever you go, there you are. Or another version of saying it is, wherever you go, you take yourself with you. And wealth building magnifies that. Because if you're impulsive, emotional, avoidant, fearful, reactive, insecure, impatient, or constantly chasing external validation, money will amplify that. More money doesn't automatically create peace. Sometimes it just gives your existing habits and your psychology more power, which is why learning how to manage yourself is just as important as learning how to manage money. Which is why you can't separate wealth building from the person building the wealth. And over time, property investing has taught me so much more than how to buy houses. It's taught me how to think long term, how to manage risk, how to stay calm when things are going wrong, how to solve problems instead of avoiding them, how to turn setbacks into opportunities, how to make decisions without panicking, how to separate emotion from strategy. And perhaps most importantly, it taught me that freedom is usually built quietly, not dramatically and not overnight, but quietly. One property, one decision, one lesson, one income stream, one shift in thinking at a time. And that's what Live Full, Retire Early is all about. Not selling fantasy lifestyles and not pretending everyone can retire next year sitting in a hammock drinking cocktails in Bali, but helping people build lives with more options, with more breathing room, more leverage, more control over their time, and less dependent on one payslip. Because I genuinely believe financial pressure changes how people live. It changes relationships. It changes their health, their confidence, their decision making. And when your income depends on one source, life feels so fragile. And property investing was one of the first things that helped me realise I could start reducing that fragility. Not instantly, but gradually. And these days, I think that's the healthier conversation around wealth. Not how can I get rich quick, but how can I build a life that feels calmer, stronger, and more resilient over time? Because they are two very different questions with two very different answers. Now look, I'm not here to tell you property investing is perfect. It's clearly not. It can be stressful, expensive, complicated, and emotionally draining. For some, there are easier ways to build wealth. And property is not the only path to financial freedom. But over time, my relationship with property investing has evolved. Because when I started, I think I was chasing freedom more emotionally. But now, I look at property much more strategically. These days, I actually enjoy flipping properties far more than holding loads of rentals. There's something I genuinely love about seeing potential where others don't. Finding opportunities, solving problems, adding value, turning neglected properties into something beautiful and something valuable again. And over the years, I've also refined my ability to source and stack property deals properly. Not through hype, not through shortcuts, but through experience, mistakes, pattern recognition, and learning the game deeply over time. And part of me has considered setting up a property sourcing business, specifically for ambitious, busy people, because I know what it feels like to get scammed, and I know what it feels like to not know who to trust, and I know how overwhelming property can feel when you're trying to build a career, managing life, and still create a better future financially. I also know there are good people out there who simply need someone trustworthy in their corner. So, maybe one day, but not yet. But for me personally, property was the thing that opened the door. It was the thing that made me question the script. It was the thing that introduced me to leverage, ownership, and long-term thinking. And ultimately, it's helped shape the entire philosophy behind Live Full, Retire Early. So the next few episodes, I want to explore the realities of building wealth properly. Not just through property, but through systems, strategy, income, decision-making, mindset, and life design overall. Because becoming work optional isn't one decision. It's the result of hundreds of small ones. But I do think we can build lives with more freedom, with intention, and more breathing room than most people realise is possible. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from today's episode, it's this. You don't need to have everything figured out before you start. Because when I bought my first property, I wasn't some fearless expert investor. I was just a woman searching for another way to live. And maybe that is where your story starts too. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Live Full, Retire Early, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would really mean a lot if you took 30 seconds to follow the show and leave a quick review. It's what helps more people discover this and start building their own work optional life. You'll find everything else, including deeper dives and practical tools, over on my Substack, which is linked in the show notes. And as always, strategy beats stress, systems beat willpower, and your future is built on what you do consistently and not occasionally. Until next time.